Good morning, Lifestyle is Healthers YouTubers and my podcast listeners. Raw Chatter, the stuff that matters is my podcast, folks. And yeah, it's not Woohoo Wednesday. Well, it is Woohoo Wednesday, but it's on a Tuesday. My plans have changed big time. I've got a flat battery on my car and waiting for the AA to come, which means that I've had to reschedule everything this morning. And obviously, I'm going to have to rejuggle so that I can change things around so people who I was supposed to be seeing today I can see tomorrow. So one thing has a kind of cascading effect, doesn't it, on all kinds of things. And it's kind of quite a good segue into part two of my story, which obviously I was going to share with you tomorrow, but I'm doing it now instead whilst I'm waiting for the kindly AA man to come sort my car out. So how I left it yesterday, last time I shared with you was me at secondary school and comparing myself to my thin best friends, wanting to push myself at running, and I did. I actually got in to the cross-country county championships, believe it or not. I did abysmally, but I actually did get in. So that's how much I pushed myself from not being anything like a good runner at all. But I did excel at short, sharp bursts of things, which for those of you who know me now today will know that I love teaching things like HIIT and spin, which is short, sharp bursts, interval style of training. And it's because it suits my body. I'm not going to go into fast twitch and slow twitch muscle fibers, but for those of you who've done any anatomy or physiology, you'll understand what I'm talking about, because our bodies are not the same. Yes, they have the same bits and the same organs, but they are not made in the same way in terms of how our muscles function and the fibers in our muscles and all that kind of good stuff. So I was never going to be a really good long distance runner. I was always much better at sprinty type fast stuff. So things like 100 meters, 200 meters were my things at sports day. And again, did I have that air of competitiveness and wanting to be the best? Absolutely. There's a saying that some of you might have heard me say: how we do one thing is how we do everything. And for those of you who have worked with me one-to-one, you'll have definitely heard me say that. And you've probably seen me write that sort of stuff in blogs, because it's true. My attitude towards schoolwork was exactly the same as my attitude towards cleaning a house or to doing DIY or to making something when I later went into doing fashion and textiles. Yes, believe it or not, I did fashion and textiles as an A-level. Very odd choice, but then my A-levels were all very odd choices. And so, yeah, how I do one thing, how I do everything. So I wanted to excel on sports day as well. And I did never get first, I don't think. I came second in a lot of things. And of course, that just reinforced, as I spoke last time, my feelings of not good enoughness, of always just not quite making it. Just like I did at secondary school, I didn't get a full scholarship. I got a partial scholarship. And I've always carried around that kind of guilt that it meant that there was a lot of arguments in my home about money. And the longer that I was at the secondary school, the more money became an issue. I mentioned that we moved house. We moved into a house that pushed my dad out of his boundaries comfortably. Was it a case of keeping up with the Joneses and wanting to be a part of the social set that he was in and be better than? Absolutely. He had one particular friend who had got a 4-bedroom house with very nice gardens and room for a greenhouse and 2 very nice cars, etc. Did my dad aspire to have all of those material things too? Yeah, absolutely, he did. Did I despise him to some extent for the amount of what's the word I'm looking for? Not pressure he put on himself, but I suppose it was pressure to come up with the goods, in that he was always working or he was always socializing. Now, I didn't realize at the time, because he was in Round Table. Some of you may have heard of Round Table and Lady Circle. Both my parents were in it, and they had a massive group of friends who were absolutely supportive of each other. And it's an amazing thing to be part of. They do some incredible work for charity. And we as kids all used to play with each other, and we'd spend Christmases together and Boxing Days together. And so social and family life was very much built around those things. However, when my dad moved house and his marriage was struggling, and it started to struggle more and more as mum's illness got worse over time. His kind of input into that was huge. He became chairman, and by that point, money was definitely an issue, and it was a case of trying to keep up appearances. And I told you that we started the F-Plan diet and I was struggling, and I discovered that I could put my fingers down my throat and make myself sick. Now, that's a really weird thing for you to discover when you think about it, right? And the only reason that I kind of twigged that that was something that I could do was because I used to get car sick when I was little. And I remember we went on a road trip, and I've got a picture somewhere of me looking terrified with my mum standing up on we came out of the car for me to get some fresh air, and we were on one of these kind of really windy cliff roads, driving. I think we were driving from France to Spain, and I was flipping terrified and was feeling sick most of the time. And I got a phobia about bridges, and the fact that you could look out the car window and see a sheer drop, just literally. And I was sick as stuff. And I remember we'd either set off after breakfast, or we'd maybe stop for lunch somewhere or something. But I know that there was food involved, and I was feeling sick. And I can distinctly remember my dad saying to my mum, "Stick your fingers down her throat, it'll make her sick." Right. And I can't remember whether my mum tried or whether I tried or what. But obviously, what I said last time about be careful about these throwaway comments, because you don't know what your kids are going to remember. I remembered that, and I just thought, you know what, I'm going to try it. Does it work? And of course, for those of you who know, you got your gag reflex there at the back of your throat. You start gagging, then chances are that you will eventually be sick. And so it's a pretty gross thing to start to do. But I realized that I could do it, and it wasn't great, and it wasn't easy, and I won't pretend that it was. In fact, it was plumbing awful. My eyes would water like crazy. It would make me cough. Your teeth catch on your fingers, and if anybody's listening and has done this, you'll kind of know what I'm talking about. And so over years, I had calluses on my hands from sticking my fingers down my throat, until I then realized that I could use other things like toilet tissue paper just screwed up, and I would tickle the back, and suddenly I could, which is gross. And I'm not going to go into all of the tools and the tricks that I used to make myself sick, because I don't want to give people ideas. And here's the thing, I read a book when my eating disorder started to get really quite obvious. And it was a book that I think my brother got from the library at his college. And I remember reading it, and it was on anorexia, but it was talking about things that people did to make themselves sick. And I actually learned some techniques from that book, which is why I'm always careful about not oversharing too much with what I actually did, because I don't want anybody else to do what I did and go, "Oh, I've never tried that. Let me try that," which could potentially escalate things to a whole other level. So I started to make myself sick, and to begin with, it was just after dinner. But then I started to kind of realize that I could maybe eat sweets and then get rid of them, and so not feel as guilty. So I worked out that there were certain foods that were easier to get rid of than others. And that over the months, and it didn't happen, really, really quickly. It happened over months, started to become my behavior pattern. I started to not want to go out after school or in the evenings and do things socially, because that was my quiet time when I could actually binge. So I would do things, crazy things like bake a batch of scones and then just literally eat the whole lot so that I could get rid of them. And what I didn't realize at the time then was that the action of throwing up is also addictive, because it hits the reward center in your brain. So not only was I addicted to certain foods, but I was also becoming addicted to throwing up as well. Now, in and amongst all of this, my parents were not having the greatest of times, and that was the kind of stage where my mum got sectioned, and that was pretty horrific. Just to see your own mother literally be put in a straitjacket in your own living room, and to hear her kicking and screaming. And when she was in that kind of manic phase, God, she was powerful. She was incredibly strong and she was incredibly loud. And it took 3 of them to get her into an ambulance. Now, at 12 years old, to watch that happen to your mum and to know that there was not a damn thing you could do about it is pretty horrific. And that was the first time that we'd experienced her going into that psychiatric hospital, the first of many, I have to say. Horrific experiences, and something that definitely led to me turning to alcohol more and more. But what I want to focus on this part of my story is the whole thing that was going on with my eating, because and money, because it came into it quite a lot. As I said, my parents argued. My brother was at this private school. I didn't get a full scholarship, so my dad still had to find some money for my fees and his. Plus, we'd moved house, and he wanted to upgrade his cars. And being a part of Round Table was not a cheap thing to do. There was a lot of socialising, but you had to pay for the events. So we got offered at my school a trip to France skiing, and I so wanted to go skiing. It wasn't something that anybody else in my family had ever done. It wasn't part of our sporting activity or anything like that. My dad was into boats and water skiing, but not until I was a little bit older. But snow skiing, oh wow, God, did I want to do that so much. And I was so lucky that I went to a school where that was even an option, because I know that I had friends who didn't go to private school whose school trips were nothing like going abroad to go skiing. So I was like, oh my God, I want to go. And I was told we couldn't afford it. Now, in my head, my kind of arrogant, I know better than you kind of head, I was fuming, because how could you afford to go out and get drunk and go out to dinners and dances and always be socializing and so forth, and yet turn around and say that you couldn't afford a skiing trip? How could you afford to send me to private school and not afford a skiing trip? How could you afford to be in this big house and not afford a skiing trip? Of course, my child brain didn't understand what an adult brain now understands, that my dad had already stretched himself to the limit and was really struggling. Hi, whoever's listening. I don't know who you are, because unfortunately it doesn't show your name on my thing. But I was absolutely fuming. Now, at the time, on the news, there was hunger strikes going on. And I'm showing my age now, but there was hunger strikes going on, and I just thought, that's what I'm going to do. Because I couldn't get what I wanted, I was going to go on a hunger strike. And I was absolutely determined that I was going to do this. And then they would learn that they had to send me on this skiing trip. And that's when I realized that I couldn't not eat. I couldn't not eat for any reasonable length of time. And that's the first time that I referred to myself as a failure. I felt like I couldn't even stand in my power to show them how frustrated, upset, angry, all of those feelings I was. And I was going to starve myself to prove my point, and I couldn't even do it. I couldn't do that. I had to give in. I had to give in and eat. And I was ridiculous. Hi, Josie. I was ridiculously upset. And that's when I was even more determined that any food I put in my mouth was going to come out again. And that's when I began to refer to myself as a failed anorexic, because in my head, people who were anorexic had no problems not eating. That was kind of their power. And I couldn't even do that. And I was so angry with myself, so annoyed, so frustrated. And that kind of took my eating and binging to a whole new level, because I was so angry and frustrated with myself. I wanted to eat more of those comfort foods. I didn't understand then what I understand now about the power of emotions on your physiology, on your stress hormones, on cortisol. I didn't understand what those foods were doing inside my body. I just knew that I wanted to make myself feel better because I was so hacked off. And those were the foods I turned to. It was always bread, it was cake, it was creamy stuff. Give me a vanilla slice or 5, and I was happy. And I'm talking about binging in serious amounts. And I got to the point where I would go into town on a Saturday, I'd catch the bus, and I would literally go and steal food. And I'm ashamed and embarrassed to say this now, and I might not sound it when I'm sharing with you, but I couldn't afford the amount of food that I needed to fuel my binges. There was only so much baking I could do and hide it, right? And not want people to eat it. And so I'd have to make one batch for the family and then another batch for myself, but do it in secret, whether it was fairy cakes or whether it was scones. And it was, when I look back, it was absolutely bonkers, and anything could set me off, anything at all. Now, fortunately for me, at our school, we weren't allowed into town during lunch breaks. We were near to town, we could walk to town, but we were not allowed into town. So I wasn't yet in the madness that happened when I was at sixth form college, where I could go into town at lunch break and actually not return, because I'd end up on a mega binge. And literally my binges then, I'm talking about when I was 16, because I was a year earlier through school. I was a year earlier to go to sort of sixth form college as well. And I would go into town on my lunch break and I would know all of the restaurants that had deals, lunchtime deals, 3-course menu deals. And I would literally go into 3 different restaurants often, as well as Greg's. And therefore it took more than a lunch hour. And I would literally have a 3-course meal and pretend that I was always in a rush, so that they would bring stuff right really quickly. And I had no qualms sitting there on my own, just binge eating on a 3-course meal, and then either using their bathroom or the public toilets, and then going on to the next one and repeating it, and going on to the next one and repeating it. And when I'm saying this now, it's just like it's a completely different person, and yet I can remember doing it so clearly. I can picture the restaurants. I can picture where I used to sit. And of course, that cost a lot of money. But I'm digressing, because I wasn't at that stage when I was at secondary school. But what I was doing was starting to isolate myself from my friends. So if I was invited over to stay overnight at a friend's house, I'd say no. I'd say I couldn't, because I needed to be at home because my mum wasn't well. And this is when I started to not realise it, that I was manipulating and using my mum's illness to enable me to continue with mine. And that's kind of crazy and scary when you think about it. But that is what I did. Did I distance myself from my friends? Yeah. But did I start going out on an evening with them? Sometimes, yeah. And did I enjoy getting drunk? Yeah. I discovered that 3 glasses of wine would just hit that sweet spot for me. I was older looking, and I think I had an air about me that allowed me to get into places. Plus, because of my family, we had a family business, and the business was quite known in our town. And as I shared with you, my parents were part of Round Table and Ladies Circle, and a lot of the town people were. My dad was also a member of the golf club, so he was quite well known in there. He supplied a lot of restaurant chains, and he supplied schools. So he had quite a big thriving business by this point. So he was quite a well-known guy, which meant that my brother and I were also known. So I couldn't really go anywhere, and this is kind of the sting in the tail, because I couldn't really go anywhere without somebody knowing or somebody seeing, which was definitely a big problem when my alcoholism hit seriously. But back then, when I was sort of 13, 14, not so much, but I could get into pubs, because I'd just say, well, I'm Richard Howard's daughter and blah, 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 let me in, and we won't drink. And we would get in. Of course we drank. And I would go to the bar and I would get served. And all of my friends were on like half a pint of lager. And I was always wanting to be different, wanting to be that special and different one who could spend a little bit more money, because I was earning. By this point, I was working. I wasn't working, I was, but I was walking the dogs for my neighbours who lived next door. And I'll share that with you in a second. But so I had some money, and so I would buy wine, which was more expensive, and 3 glasses just hit that sweet spot for me. And it was one of those things that I didn't realise at the time, but you know what? I absolutely did really, really enjoy drinking and that sensation of getting drunk. I liked being on the bus, kind of feeling a bit like this. And if you're listening to this on the podcast, you can't see me, but I'm swaying. And I liked that sensation. I didn't want it to end. And what I discovered was I didn't worry about food. I didn't think about food. I didn't need to think about food, because I enjoyed the sensation that I was feeling from being drunk. And that was 13. Now, when I look back, my grandparents, my mum's parents, had a pub, and I used to stay overnight with them. And I can distinctly remember at sort of 10 years old, I used to play musical instruments and used to think I was really good. And you can see that there's a theme here, me always thinking that I was better than I was, and yet internally not thinking I was good enough. But I used to play the recorder, and that morphed into me playing the flute. And so my granddad used to play the organ. And so on a Friday night or a Saturday night, he'd have a little turn on the organ, and I'd ask if I could play with him. And I'd either play the recorder or the flute. I also played the trumpet. And yes, I did get all of those kind of jests about fat puffy cheeks and all that kind of stuff. And are you going to be the leader of a brass band and all? Yeah, I love playing the trumpet. I think I preferred it to the flute, but I was obviously a woodwind person. I was not good at strings. I wasn't good at the piano. But anything that you blow, interestingly, something to do with your mouth. Hey ho, there may be something more in that. Who knows? That's maybe something that I'll look at. But I would go to their pub, and I would stay overnight when I was a little bit older. And they had this most gorgeous Alsatian dog that I absolutely adored. And so we would sit upstairs in the flat, because they lived above the pub, while they were downstairs serving the drinks. And when I was allowed to have a baby sham and a packet of crisps, but it was meant to be one. Except what did I do? I'd get one from my granddad, and then maybe an hour later I'd go down and I'd go to my grandma and say, can I have that baby sham and bag of crisps now, please? And I'd get a second baby sham and bag of crisps. And then I'd go down a third time to one of the bar staff. They had one kind of top bar lady, and I'd say, oh, Grandma and Grandad are really, really busy, but they did say that I could have a baby sham and a bag of crisps tonight. So I'd get a third one. Sometimes I'd even do it a fourth time if I thought I could get away with it. Now, this is 9-10 years old, I'm doing this. So even then, there was an element of me manipulating people to get what I wanted. And it's not a great thing to discover about yourself, that you are a manipulator of people to get what you want, to enable yourself to feel better by utilizing basically drugs in the form of salt and sugar in the case of crisps, and alcohol, obviously, in the case of baby sham. Did I ever go more than that? Did I ever ask for anything else? No. But I definitely had the taste for alcohol, and I definitely liked it. And so I was drinking on a Saturday night when we went out. It wasn't every week, but I did look forward to it, and I absolutely did enjoy it. So if I wasn't so worried about the food, it kind of stuck in my head that if I drank, I didn't feel like I needed to eat. And that's a theme that definitely followed through. And as we started to get into the realms of exams and exam fever and all of that, doing your mocks and then the pressure's seriously on, that's when I started to feel really insecure in my abilities, and I really started to diet hard and started to skip meals and then eat even more. And I didn't understand then the fact that I was skipping meals meant that I was actually setting myself up to binge. I just thought it was to do with the fact that I was getting even worse at willpower and I had no control, and there was seriously something the matter with me. And then I discovered this book, and it talked about laxatives. And that's what I started to do. And that is, I'm going to save that for part 3 because my phone is now ringing, and I'm hoping that's the AA man. So thank you for listening, folks, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.